In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a single chime never sounded. A silent clock tower holds the key to a murder most foul. Sir Reginald Harwood lies dead, a broken clock frozen at 11:47 clutched in his hand, and a rusted rod marked with an R whispers of revenge. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of lies, betrayals, hidden loves, and a killer hiding in plain sight. Can you guess the truth before the final chime? Dive into a classic mystery where every clue counts and the heart's darkest secrets unravel in a shocking reveal. Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Silent Clock Tower. In the waning days of autumn, when the leaves of Kent hung heavy with the hues of amber and crimson, the village of Ashburn lay under a shroud of uneasy quiet. Nestled in the embrace of rolling hills, its cobblestone streets and ivy-clad cottages seemed to whisper secrets to those who paused to listen. At the heart of the village stood the ancient clock tower, its weathered stone rising like a sentinel over the square. For generations, its sonorous chimes had marked the hours, a steadfast rhythm that wove itself into the fabric of Ashburn's daily life. But on this particular morning, the tower was silent, its hands frozen at precisely 10 minutes to midnight. A silence that seemed to herald something far more sinister than a mere mechanical fault. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal chronicler of his friend Sherlock Holmes' exploits, found himself in Ashburn at the invitation of Sir Reginald Ashburn, the last scion of an ancient family whose ancestral manor loomed on the village's edge. Sir Reginald, a man of robust health and formidable presence despite his 60 years, had written to Hastings with an air of urgency that piqued the latter's curiosity. The letter, penned in a hurried hand, spoke of a matter most delicate and perplexing, one that required the singular talents of Sherlock Holmes, the celebrated Belgian detective whose reputation for unraveling the impossible had spread far beyond the shores of England. Hastings, whose own temperament leaned toward the practical rather than the profound, arrived at Ashburn Manor under a sky heavy with the threat of rain. The manor itself was a study in contrasts. Its Georgian facade spoke of elegance and order, yet the overgrown gardens and chipped cornices betrayed a neglect that suggested financial strain or indifference. As Hastings stepped from his carriage, he was greeted by the butler, a stooped figure named Grayson, whose lined face bore the weight of long service and unspoken loyalties. "Captain Hastings, sir," Grayson intoned, his voice as dry as the leaves skittering across the drive. "Sir Reginald awaits you in the library. I trust your journey was without incident." "Quite pleasant, thank you," Hastings replied, adjusting his hat and casting an eye toward the clock tower in the distance. "Though I confess, the silence of that tower is rather unsettling." "Has it been long out of order?" Grayson's expression tightened imperceptibly.
"Since last night, sir. The mechanism is being examined, but it is most unusual."
He turned abruptly, leading Hastings through the manor's heavy oak doors. The library was a cavernous room, its walls lined with books that seemed to absorb the meager light filtering through tall, mullioned windows. Sir Reginald stood by a roaring fire, his broad shoulders squared as if braced against an unseen foe. Beside him stood his daughter, Miss Eleanor Ashbourne, a woman of perhaps 25 whose delicate features were marred by a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, flickered with a mixture of apprehension and resolve.
"Captain Hastings!"
Sir Reginald's voice boomed, though it carried a note of strain.
"I am grateful you've come. And Monsieur Holmes, will he join us?"
"He follows tomorrow," Hastings replied, clasping Sir Reginald's outstretched hand. "He had a small matter in London to conclude, but I assure you his interest is piqued. Your letter was most compelling. Might I know the nature of this delicate matter?" Sir Reginald exchanged a glance with his daughter, who nodded almost imperceptibly.
"It is a matter of theft,"
he began, his voice lowering.
A family heirloom, the Ashbourne sapphire, has vanished from its locked case in this very room. But it is more than theft, Captain. There is a shadow over this house. Threats have been made, anonymous and vile, suggesting knowledge of secrets we thought buried. And now, with the clock tower's silence last night, I fear something worse is afoot.
Eleanor stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. Father is too proud to admit it, Captain, but we are frightened. The sapphire is not merely valuable, it is a symbol of our family's honor. Its loss feels like a wound, and these threats, she faltered, her voice catching. They speak of betrayal from within. Hastings, ever the gentleman, offered a reassuring smile. Rest assured, Miss Ashbourne, Sherlock Holmes has a way of bringing light to even the darkest mysteries. Might I see where the sapphire was kept? Sir Reginald led him to a mahogany cabinet in the corner, its glass front intact but for a single, precise hole where a lock once sat.
It was here,
he said, pointing to a velvet-lined compartment, now empty.
The case was locked.
Congratulations, Miss Ashbourne. And who were these guests? Eleanor's cheeks flushed faintly. Thank you, Captain. There was Mr. Langley, of course, my fiancé, Dr. Mortimer Hale, our family physician, Mrs. Clara Winthrop, a dear friend of my late mother, and Mr. Julian Carver, a solicitor from London handling some estate matters. Hastings nodded, committing the names to memory. And the clock tower, when precisely did it stop? At 10 minutes to midnight, Grayson replied. I heard the last chime myself as I locked the manor's doors. A curious coincidence, Hastings murmured, his mind already racing with possibilities. He knew Sherlock Holmes would seize upon such a detail, for the little Belgian was fond of saying that order and method were the keys to unlocking any puzzle. Might I examine the grounds and the tower itself? Of course, Sir Reginald said, though his tone suggested reluctance. Grayson will accompany you, but be warned, Captain, the village is uneasy. Some whisper of curses, tied to the sapphire itself. Hastings smiled faintly. I assure you, Sir Reginald, Sherlock Holmes has little patience for curses. Facts, sir, are his currency. As Grayson led him toward the clock tower, Hastings's thoughts turned to his friend. Sherlock Holmes, with his fastidious habits and unerring logic, would no doubt find the silence of the clock tower as significant as the missing sapphire. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and as they approached the tower, its shadow seemed to stretch across the village like a warning. The door at its base was ajar, revealing a spiral staircase that vanished into gloom. Has anyone been inside since last night? Hastings asked, peering into the darkness. Not to my knowledge, sir, Grayson replied, his voice betraying a hint of unease. The clockmaker, Mr. Thwaites, was summoned this morning, but he found no fault in the mechanism. It simply stopped. Hastings stepped inside, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The air was cool and musty, and as his eyes adjusted, he noted the intricate gears above, motionless, as if frozen in time. A single object caught his eye, a scrap of paper wedged between two cogs, its edge torn as if hastily placed. He retrieved it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a single line of cramped, hurried script. The shadow falls at midnight. His pulse quickened. This was no accident, no mere mechanical failure. The note, the sapphire, the threats, all pointed to a design as deliberate as it was sinister. He tucked the note into his pocket, resolving to present it to Sherlock Holmes upon his arrival. As he descended the tower, the village square seemed to watch him, its silence louder than any chime. Back at the manor, the household was assembling for tea, a ritual that and an air of quiet confidence. Dr. Hale, a wiry figure with spectacles perched precariously on his nose,
spoke in hushed tones to Mrs. Winthrop, whose elegant morning attire hinted at a grief long carried. Julian Carver, the solicitor, stood apart, his eyes darting about as if cataloguing every detail of the room. Hastings observed them all, knowing that Sherlock Holmes would see beyond their polite facades to the secrets they hid. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the mystery of the silent clock tower had begun to unfold. Tomorrow, Sherlock Holmes would arrive, and with him, the promise of clarity in a world shadowed by doubt. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Light. The morning broke over Ashbourne with a reluctant dawn, the sky a sullen grey that seemed to mirror the village's unease. The clock tower, still silent, loomed over the square, its frozen hands a stark reminder of the mystery that had taken root in the heart of the community. Captain Hastings, having spent a restless night in the guest room of Ashbourne Manor, rose early, his thoughts consumed by the cryptic note he had found in the tower. "The shadow falls at midnight." It was a phrase that carried the weight of intent, and he knew Sherlock Holmes would dissect its meaning with surgical precision. As Hastings descended to the dining room, he found the household subdued, the clink of porcelain and the murmur of conversation muted by an air of apprehension. Sir Reginald sat at the head of the table, his face etched with lines of worry that had deepened overnight. Eleanor, seated beside her fiancé, Victor Langley, toyed with her teacup, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting some unseen threat. Dr. Mortimer Hale and Mrs. Clara Winthrop were present, their polite exchanges tinged with strain, while Julian Carver, the solicitor, ate in silence, his sharp gaze missing nothing. The meal was interrupted by a commotion at the front door. Grayson, the butler, entered with a grave expression, his usual composure frayed. "Sir Reginald," he said, his voice low but urgent, "there has been a tragedy. Mr. Thwaites, the clockmaker, was found this morning at the base of the clock tower. He is dead." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, and Victor Langley's arm instinctively encircled her. Sir Reginald rose, his chair scraping against the floor. "Dead? How? An accident?" Grayson hesitated, his eyes flickering toward Hastings. "It appears not, sir. There are marks upon him. The constable believes it to be foul play." Hastings' heart quickened. The clockmaker's death, so soon after the theft of the Ashbourne sapphire and the tower's inexplicable silence, could not be mere coincidence. He excused himself from the table, his mind already turning to the methods of Sherlock Holmes. "I shall go to the scene at once."
Until his arrival, Sir Reginald nodded, his face ashen. "Do what you must, Captain. This is a dark day for Ashbourne." The village square was alive with whispers as Hastings approached the clock tower, accompanied by Grayson. A small crowd had gathered, held back by a young constable whose nervous demeanour suggested he was ill-equipped for such a crisis. At the base of the tower lay the body of Mr. Thwaites, a wiry man of middle age, his eyes staring blankly at the overcast sky. A deep gash marred his temple, and his hands were clutched as if in a final act of defence. The cobblestones beneath him were stained with blood, now congealing in the chill morning air. Hastings knelt beside the body, his eyes scanning for details as Sherlock Holmes had taught him. The wound was precise, likely delivered by a heavy object wielded with force. Nearby, half hidden in the grass, was a brass gear, its edge smeared with blood. Hastings retrieved it carefully, noting its weight and the faint scratches along its surface, as if it had been forcibly removed from the clock tower's mechanism. "Grayson," Hastings said, rising, "when did you last see Mr. Thwaites alive?" "Yesterday evening, sir," the butler replied. "He came to the manor after inspecting the clock tower, around 8 o'clock. He said the mechanism was sound, yet it refused to chime. He seemed troubled, but he would not say why." "And where was everyone in the household after the dinner guests departed?" Grayson's brow furrowed. "Most retired to their rooms, sir. Sir Reginald was in his study until late. Miss Eleanor and Mr. Langley sat in the drawing-room until nearly 11. Dr. Hale left for his cottage shortly after dinner, and Mrs. Winthrop and Mr. Carver departed together as they shared a carriage to the neighbouring village." Hastings nodded,
his mind cataloguing the alibis. "And you, Grayson? Your duties kept you about the house?" "Indeed, sir. I locked the doors at 10 minutes to midnight, as I told you. I heard nothing unusual after that." The constable, a young man named Barrett, approached, his notebook trembling in his hands. "Captain Hastings, sir. I sent for the coroner, but the villagers are talking. They say the clock tower's silence is a curse tied to the Ashbourne sapphire. And now this—" He gestured helplessly at Thwaites' body. "Nonsense," Hastings said briskly, though his tone softened at the constable's distress. "Curses do not bludgeon men to death. This is the work of human hands, and Sherlock Holmes will uncover them. Tell me, Barrett, was anything else found near the body?" Barrett shook his head. "Nothing, sir, save that gear you're holding. The ground's too hard for footprints and the rain last night washed away any tracks." Hastings pocketed the gear, his thoughts racing. The gear, the note, the sapphire. All were threads in a tapestry Sherlock Holmes would weave into.
Where the household had gathered in the drawing room, their faces a gallery of fear and suspicion. Sir Reginald paced before the fireplace while Eleanor clung to Victor's arm. Dr. Hale adjusted his spectacles nervously, and Mrs. Winthrop's hands twisted in her lap. Carver alone seemed composed, though his eyes followed Hastings with an intensity that bordered on predatory. "Captain," Sir Reginald said, his voice hoarse, "what have you found? Is it true Thwaites was murdered?" "I fear so," Hastings replied, choosing his words carefully. "A wound to the head, likely from a heavy object. I found a brass gear nearby, possibly from the clock tower itself. It may be the murder weapon." Eleanor gasped, and Victor's grip on her tightened. "But why?" she whispered. "Mr. Thwaites was a kind man, harmless. Who would do such a thing?" "That is what Sherlock Holmes will determine," Hastings said, his tone firm. "For now I must ask each of you to account for your movements after midnight. The constable will need precise details." A murmur of protest rose, but Sir Reginald silenced it with a raised hand. "We will cooperate, Captain, but surely you do not suspect one of us." Hastings met his gaze evenly. "I suspect nothing, sir. I merely observe, as Sherlock Holmes would. The truth lies in the details." The interviews that followed were a study in human nature. Sir Reginald claimed to have been in his study, reviewing estate papers till nearly 1 in the morning. Eleanor and Victor swore they had retired together to the drawing room, parting at 11:30. Dr. Hale, who lived a short walk from the manor, said he had been home by 10 and asleep by 11. Mrs. Winthrop and Carver, sharing a carriage, confirmed they had left at 10:30 and reached their respective homes by 11. Grayson reiterated his routine of locking the doors at 10 minutes to midnight, after which he retired to his quarters. Yet Hastings, trained by Sherlock Holmes's exacting standards, noted subtle inconsistencies. Sir Reginald's hands trembled as he spoke of his study, as if guarding a secret. Eleanor's eyes avoided Victor's when she recounted their evening, and Dr. Hale's precise recollection of his bedtime seemed rehearsed. Mrs. Winthrop's morning attire, though elegant, was curiously pristine for a woman who had travelled by carriage, and Carver's calm was too perfect, his answers too measured. As the household dispersed, Hastings lingered in the drawing room, his gaze falling on a portrait above the fireplace, a stern-faced woman in Victorian dress, her eyes eerily similar to Eleanor's. The late Lady Ashbourne, he presumed, whose death years ago had left a void in the family. He wondered if her shadow, like that of the clock tower, played a role in the unfolding drama. A telegram arrived as the afternoon waned, announcing Sherlock Holmes's imminent arrival on the evening train. Hastings felt a relief, knowing his friend's presence would bring order to the chaos. He stepped outside, the air sharp with the promise of rain, and gazed at the clock tower. Its silence was no longer merely unsettling, it was a challenge, a puzzle that demanded resolution. The death of Thwaites had escalated the stakes, transforming a theft into a murder, and Hastings knew that Sherlock Holmes, with his little grey cells, would see what others could not. As the village settled into an uneasy dusk, the manor's lights flickered like beacons against the gathering dark. The stage was set, the players poised. and the mystery of the silent clock tower had claimed its first victim. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Sherlock Holmes. The evening train from London pulled into Ashbourne's modest station under a sky bruised with the threat of storm. The platform, lit by flickering gas lamps, was nearly deserted, save for Captain Hastings, who stood with his collar turned up against the chill. His anticipation was palpable, for the arrival of Sherlock Holmes promised to bring clarity to the dark currents swirling around Ashbourne Manor. The theft of the Ashbourne sapphire and the brutal murder of Mr. Thwaites had cast a pall over the village, and Hastings, though diligent, knew his own observations paled beside the analytical brilliance of his friend. The train's whistle pierced the dusk, and moments later Sherlock Holmes stepped onto the platform, his slight figure immaculate in a tailored overcoat, his eyes gleaming with the keen alertness that marked his every movement. His moustache was perfectly trimmed, his hat tilted at a precise angle, and his walking stick tapped the ground with a rhythm that suggested order amidst chaos. Behind him, a porter struggled with a single leather valise, which Holmes waved off with a polite but firm gesture. "Mon ami, Hastings!" Holmes exclaimed, his Belgian accent lending a musical quality to his words. "You have the air of a man who has stumbled into a puzzle most intriguing. Tell me, what is this silence that grips the village? And why does death now walk among us?" Hastings, relieved by Holmes' presence, recounted the events in rapid succession: the theft of the sapphire, the cryptic note in the clock tower, the murder of Thwaites, and the alibis of the manor's inhabitants. He produced the blood-smeared brass gear and the note reading, "The shadow falls at midnight," which Holmes examined with a magnifying glass, his lips pursed in thought. "Most curious," Holmes murmured, turning the gear in his gloved hands. "This is no ordinary component, Hastings. Its weight and craftsmanship suggest it is integral to the clock tower's mechanism, yet it was removed with force. And this note, deliberate yet vague. It is a message, but for whom?" He tucked both items into his pocket, his eyes scanning the village square. "Come."
Manor was brief but tense, the carriage rattling over cobblestones as the first drops of rain pattered against the roof. Holmes sat in silence, his fingers steepled, his gaze distant yet piercing, as if already assembling the fragments of the mystery. Hastings, accustomed to his friend's methods, knew better than to interrupt this meditative state. They were greeted at the manor by Grayson, whose stoic demeanour faltered slightly at the sight of Holmes. "Monsieur Holmes, sir," he said, bowing. "Sir Reginald awaits you in the drawing-room. The household is much disturbed." "As they should be," Holmes replied, his tone courteous but edged with steel. "A theft and a murder in one night are not trifles. Lead on, Monsieur Grayson." The drawing-room was a tableau of strained civility. Sir Reginald stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, while Eleanor and Victor Langley sat close together, their faces pale. Dr. Hale hovered near a sideboard, pouring himself a brandy with unsteady hands, and Mrs. Winthrop sat rigidly, her black gloves stark against her pale hands. Julian Carver, the solicitor, leaned against a bookcase, his expression one of calculated neutrality. Holmes entered with the air of a conductor about to lead an orchestra, his presence commanding attention without effort. "Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs," he said, removing his hat with a flourish. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and I am here to unravel the threads of this most unfortunate affair. A sapphire is stolen, a clock tower falls silent, and a man lies dead. These are not separate events, I think, but parts of a single design. I shall require your cooperation and your truth." Sir Reginald stepped forward, his voice gruff. "Monsieur Holmes, we are at your disposal. This tragedy has shaken us all. What do you require?" "Everything," Holmes said simply, his eyes sweeping the room. "But we shall begin with observation. Captain Hastings has told me of the sapphire's theft from a locked cabinet. I wish to see this cabinet, and then I shall visit the clock tower. But first, a question. Who among you last saw Mr. Thwaites alive, and where?" A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Eleanor spoke first, her voice trembling. "I saw him yesterday afternoon, when he came to inspect the clock tower. He seemed anxious, but he said nothing of importance." Victor Langley nodded. "I saw him too, briefly, as he left the manor. He was muttering to himself something about the weight of time. I thought it odd, but he was an eccentric man." Dr. Hale cleared his throat. "I passed him in the village square around 7. He was heading toward the tower, carrying his tools. He nodded to me, but did not speak. Mrs. Winthrop and Carver claimed to have seen Thwaites only at a distance during the dinner party, while Grayson reiterated his encounter at 8 o'clock. Holmes listened.
Account was given, as if weighing their words against an invisible scale. "Very well," he said at length. "Now, the cabinet, if you please." Sir Reginald led them to the library, where the mahogany cabinet stood, its glass front still bearing the telltale hole where the lock had been. Holmes examined it with meticulous care, his magnifying glass tracing the edges of the hole, the hinges, and the surrounding wood. He tapped the glass, producing a faint, clear note, and then turned his attention to the room itself, pacing its perimeter with measured steps. "Curious," he remarked, pausing by a window that overlooked the gardens. "This window is slightly ajar, yet the latch is undamaged. Was it so last night, Sir Reginald?" Sir Reginald frowned. I cannot say. The servants are responsible for such things." Grayson, standing nearby, stiffened. "The windows were checked, sir, as always. I found nothing amiss." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "And yet something was amiss, was it not? A sapphire does not vanish by magic." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, you have seen the clock tower. Take me there now." The rain had begun in earnest as they crossed the village square, the clock tower's silhouette stark against the storm. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, the spiral staircase winding into shadows. Holmes ascended with the agility of a cat, his eyes darting to every surface. At the mechanism, he paused, examining the gears with the same intensity he had given the cabinet. "The gear you found, Hastings," he said, producing it from his pocket. "It fits here precisely. But see these marks, scratches, fresh and deliberate. Someone tampered with this mechanism, and not by accident." He knelt, his fingers brushing the floor, and retrieved a tiny fragment of blue thread, barely visible. "And this, caught in a splinter. Not from a workman's attire, I think." Hastings watched, marveling at Holmes's precision. "Do you think the murderer tampered with the clock to send a message?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A message, yes, but also a distraction. The clock's silence draws attention, but to what end? We shall see." He pocketed the thread and descended the stairs, pausing at the spot where Thwaites had been found. The bloodstains were still visible, though the rain had diluted them. Holmes crouched, his gaze fixed on the cobblestones. "No footprints, as the constable said," he murmured. "But the ground is uneven here. A struggle, perhaps, but a brief one. Thwaites was struck from behind, I wager, by someone he did not expect." Back at the manor, Holmes declined dinner, preferring to sit by the library fire with a cup of tea, his eyes half Mislead. Holmes's arrival had set the stage, but the drama was far from resolved. As the rain drummed against the windows, Hastings thought of the note, "The shadow falls at midnight." With Holmes now in Ashburn, that shadow would soon be illuminated, but at what cost? Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The morning following Sherlock Holmes's arrival in Ashburn dawned with a deceptive calm, the rain having retreated to leave a mist that clung to the village like a shroud. The clock tower, still silent, stood as a mute witness to the tragedy that had unfolded at its base, and the manor's inhabitants moved through their routines with the stiffness of those awaiting judgment. Captain Hastings, fortified by a strong cup of tea, joined Holmes in the library, where the detective sat at a polished table, surrounded by notes, the brass gear, and the cryptic message from the clock tower. Holmes's eyes, bright with purpose, flicked up as Hastings entered. "Bon matin, mon ami," he said, his voice crisp despite the early hour. "The little grey cells. They have been active. Today we probe deeper. The theft of the sapphire and the death of Monsieur Thwaites are entwined, but the knot is complex. We must question the players in this drama and observe not only what they say, but what they do not." Hastings nodded, accustomed to Holmes's method of unraveling human motives through meticulous observation. "Where shall we begin, Holmes? The household is on edge, and the village is rife with rumors of curses." Holmes's lips curved in a faint, disdainful smile. "Curses, Hastings, are the refuge of minds too lazy to seek the truth. No, we begin with the human heart, its passions, its secrets. Arrange for the household to gather in the drawing room, one by one. I shall speak with each, and you, my dear friend, shall watch their faces, their hands, their eyes. The body betrays what the tongue conceals." By mid-morning, the drawing room was prepared, its heavy curtains drawn to admit a soft grey light. Holmes sat in a high-backed chair, his posture immaculate, his fingers steepled, as if in prayer to logic itself. Hastings stood by the fireplace, notebook in hand, ready to record every nuance. The first to be summoned was Sir Reginald Ashburn, whose broad frame seemed diminished by the weight of recent events. "Monsieur Holmes," Sir Reginald began, his voice gruff but controlled, "I trust you've made progress. This affair is a stain upon my family's honour." Holmes inclined his head. "The honour of the Ashburns is a matter of great interest, Sir Reginald. Tell me, the sapphire, its value is..."
Study until 1 in the morning? What occupied you so late?
"Estate papers," Sir Reginald replied, a touch too quickly. "The manor's finances are delicate. I was reviewing accounts."
Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And no one disturbed you? No sound, no visitor?"
"None,"
Sir Reginald said firmly, though his fingers drummed briefly on the arm of his chair. Holmes dismissed him with a nod, and Eleanor Ashbourne entered next, her green eyes shadowed with fatigue. She sat with a grace that belied her tension, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Mademoiselle Eleanor," Holmes began, his tone gentle but probing, "you saw Monsieur Thwaites yesterday afternoon. He was anxious, you said. Did he speak of the sapphire, or of any threat?" Eleanor shook her head. "He mentioned only the clock tower, that it was wrong somehow. I thought he meant the mechanism, but his manner was odd, as if he feared something." "And your fiancé, Monsieur Langley, where was he when you parted at 11:30? "He went to his room," she said, her voice faltering. We had a small disagreement, nothing serious. He was tired, as was I." Holmes's gaze lingered on her, noting the slight flush in her cheeks. "A disagreement, you say? About the engagement, perhaps?" Eleanor's eyes widened, then dropped. "It was nothing, Monsieur Holmes. A trifle." Victor Langley followed, his handsome features set in a mask of concern. "Monsieur Holmes, I want only to protect Eleanor," he said earnestly. "This theft, this murder, it's unbearable for her." Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Your devotion is admirable, Monsieur Langley. Tell me, when you left Mademoiselle Eleanor at 11:30, you retired directly to your room?" "Yes," Langley said, his tone steady. "I read for a time, then slept." "And you heard nothing? No footsteps, no cries?" "Nothing," Langley replied, though his hand brushed his cuff, a gesture Holmes noted with a flicker of interest. Dr. Mortimer Hale was next, his spectacles glinting as he adjusted them nervously. "Monsieur Holmes, I am a man of science," he said, his voice thin. "I deal in facts, not mysteries. I was home by 10, asleep by 11. I know nothing of Thwaites' death." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Yet you saw him at 7, in the square. Was he alone?" Hale hesitated. "I believe so. It was dark, and I was in a hurry." Mrs. Clara Winthrop entered with the dignity of one accustomed to sorrow, her black attire absorbing the light. "Monsieur Holmes," she said softly, "I am a guest in this house, nothing more. I left with Mr. Carver at 10:30.
Holmes, he said, his voice smooth. I am here to settle estate matters, not to meddle in tragedies. I left with Mrs. Winthrop, as she said, and was home by 11. Holmes's eyes gleamed. You are observant, Monsieur Carver. Did you observe anything unusual at the dinner? Carver's smile was thin. Only that the household was tense. The sapphire's theft was already whispered about. Grayson, summoned last, recounted his duties with precision. I locked the doors at 10 minutes to midnight, as always. I heard no disturbance. Holmes dismissed him with a nod, then turned to Hastings. What do you make of it, mon ami? Their words, their gestures. Hastings frowned, consulting his notes. Sir Reginald seemed nervous about his finances. Eleanor avoided Langley's gaze when speaking of him. Langley touched his cuff, as if hiding something. Hale was vague, Winthrop distant, and Carver too calm. Holmes clapped his hands. Bravo, Hastings. You see, but you do not yet observe. The cuff, the glance, the pause, these are the notes of our symphony. Now, let us visit the scene of the crime once more. The clock tower was as they had left it, its gears still and silent. Holmes examined the mechanism again, his fingers tracing the scratches where the gear had been removed. This was no random act, he said. The gear was taken to stop the clock, to mark a moment. And the thread I found? Blue, fine, not from a servant's attire. It belongs to someone of means. They returned to the manor, where Holmes requested to see the servants' quarters and the guest rooms. In Langley's room, he paused by the wardrobe, his fingers brushing a blue silk scarf. Interesting, he murmured, noting its frayed edge. In Eleanor's room, he examined a jewelry box, finding a hairpin bent out of shape, as if used to pick a lock. As evening fell, Holmes sat with Hastings in the library, the fire casting shadows on the walls. The alibis are too neat, Holmes said. Each claims solitude at the critical hour, yet someone was in the square at midnight. The gear, the thread, the note, these are clues, but also distractions. We must look beyond them, to the motives. Hastings leaned forward. You suspect one of them, don't you? Holmes's eyes twinkled. I suspect everyone, Hastings, until the little grey cells prove otherwise. Tomorrow, we shall stir the pot. A small pressure, applied correctly, will reveal the cracks. As the manor settled into an uneasy night, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery deepen. Holmes's questions had peeled back the first layer of deception, but the truth remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of the silent clock tower. Suspicion. And the guests, though outwardly composed, moved with the guarded precision of those who knew they were being watched. In the grand dining room, where breakfast was laid out with an elegance that belied the grim events of a previous night, the clink of porcelain and the murmur of strained pleasantries filled the space. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit, sat at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled company with the calm intensity of a predator assessing its prey. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated to Poirot's left, felt the weight of the atmosphere keenly. He had seen Poirot in such moods before, silent, observant, his mind a whirl of calculations beneath the polished exterior. Hastings glanced at the others. Lady Eleanor Harwood, pale but composed, stirring her tea with a delicate hand. Mr. Charles Langley, the solicitor, whose nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles betrayed his unease. Miss Clara Harwood, a youthful beauty marred by red-rimmed eyes. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, whose cool detachment seemed almost clinical. And Mr. Victor Crane, the American industrialist, who ate with a hearty appetite that struck Hastings as oddly out of place. The servants, too, hovered at the edges of the room, their faces masks of professional neutrality, though Hastings noted the young maid, Eliza, casting furtive glances towards the clock tower visible through the window. Poirot, for his part, had said little since their arrival at the manor the previous evening. His questions to Inspector Japp, who had taken charge of the investigation, had been brief but pointed, and he had spent much of the night pacing the library, examining the scene of the crime with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. The broken clock in Sir Reginald's hand, its hands frozen at 11:47, had drawn his particular attention, as had the curious absence of sound from the clock tower itself. Hastings knew better than to interrupt his friend's thoughts, but the tension in the room compelled him to speak. "Poirot," he said in a low voice, leaning closer, "the police seem convinced that Crane is their man. His quarrel with Sir Reginald last night was no secret, and Japp says they found a letter in Crane's room suggesting he stood to lose a fortune if Sir Reginald's deal fell through." Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile, his moustache quivering slightly. "Mon ami, the police, they are like the hounds who chase the first scent they find. It is loud, it is obvious, and so they run. But Hercule Poirot does not run. He observes. He thinks. This letter, it is too convenient, no? A man like Mr. Crane, bold, brash, does not leave such a thing for all to find, unless he wishes it to be found, or unless another wishes it so." Hastings frowned, his honest face reflecting his confusion.
Clock tower. Nothing is as it seems. Come, let us observe the hounds at work. They rose from the table, Poirot's small frame moving with a quiet grace that contrasted with the heavy tread of Inspector Japp, who entered the room at that moment, his face flushed with the air of a man who believed he was closing in on his quarry. "Mr. Poirot," Japp said, nodding brusquely, "I trust you've had your fill of breakfast. We've got work to do. I'm about to question Crane again, and I'd wager we'll have a confession before noon." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Inspector, your confidence is admirable, but I suggest you widen your net. The fish you seek may not be the one flapping so loudly in your trap." Japp bristled but said nothing, leading the way to the drawing room where Victor Crane awaited. The American sat in a high-backed chair, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw set in defiance. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of unease as Japp began his interrogation. "Mr. Crane," Japp said, his tone sharp, "we found a letter in your room, addressed to you from a business associate in New York. It states plainly that if Sir Reginald's deal with your company fell through, you'd be ruined. Care to explain why you didn't mention this last night when I asked about your dealings with Sir Reginald?" Crane's face reddened, and he leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "I didn't mention it because it's none of your damn business, Inspector. Yes, I had a deal with Harwood. Yes, we argued. But I didn't kill him. I was in my room at the time of the murder. Ask the maid, Eliza. She brought me a nightcap around 11. Poirot, standing near the fireplace, raised a finger. "Pardon, Monsieur Crane, but this nightcap, it was delivered at what time precisely?" Crane hesitated, his eyes narrowing. 11, maybe a bit after. Why?" Poirot did not answer directly but turned to Japp. "Inspector, have you confirmed this with the maid?" Japp nodded. "She says she delivered the drink at 11, just as Crane claims. But that doesn't clear him. The murder happened around midnight, and his room's just down the hall from the library. Plenty of time to slip out and do the deed." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but Hastings could tell his friend was not convinced. "And the letter, Inspector, where was it found?" "In his desk drawer." Japp's smallest details. The way Clara Harwood avoided looking at Crane. The slight hesitation in Dr. Marsh's step as she passed the fireplace. The nervous tick in Langley's cheek as he adjusted his spectacles yet again. As the morning wore on, Japp's focus on Crane grew more intense. But Poirot withdrew to the library, beckoning Hastings to follow. The room, still cordoned off by the police, was a study in contrasts. The rich mahogany shelves, the plush carpet, and the stark outline of Sir Reginald's body, now removed, but marked by chalk. Poirot knelt beside the spot where the broken clock had been found, his fingers tracing the air as if reconstructing the moment of the crime. Hastings, he said softly, consider the clock. Its hands stopped at 11:47, yet the clock tower itself has not chimed since yesterday evening. Why? And why was this clock, a small personal item, in Sir Reginald's hand? It is not a weapon nor a tool. It is a message. Hastings frowned. A message? From whom? From the murderer, perhaps. Or from Sir Reginald himself. The time, 11:47. It is precise. It is deliberate. We must discover what happened at that hour and why the clock tower is silent. They were interrupted by the arrival of Eliza, the maid, who entered to clear away a tray of tea things. Her hands trembled slightly, and Poirot's eyes narrowed as he watched her. "Mademoiselle," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you brought Monsieur Crane his nightcap at 11, oui? Did you see anything unusual in the house at that time?" Eliza hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "No, sir. It was quiet. Everyone was in their rooms, far as I know." "And the clock tower?" Poirot pressed. "Did it chime at 11? She shook her head. "No, sir. It's been silent since early evening. The groundskeeper, Mr. Gibbs, said something about the mechanism jamming." Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a polite smile. But as she left, he turned to Hastings. "The clock tower, Hastings. It is the key. Its silence is not an accident, but a clue. And Monsieur Crane, he is too obvious a suspect. The true killer is cleverer, hiding behind the noise of false evidence." As they left the library, the weight of Poirot's words settled over Hastings. The manor was a maze of secrets, and while Japp chased the loudest trail, Poirot was already untangling the subtler threads of the truth. The red herrings were plentiful, but Hercule Poirot would not be swayed by them. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The pale light of late morning filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, cast a lane. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, watched his friend with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, knowing that Poirot's mind was already piecing together fragments of evidence invisible to others. The library was a cavern of knowledge, its shelves heavy with leather-bound tomes, but it was the small details that held Poirot's attention. The broken clock, its hands frozen at 11:47. The faint scuff mark on the carpet near the desk, and the curious absence of sound from the clock tower, which loomed like a silent guardian beyond the window. Poirot had spent the morning in quiet observation, declining to join Inspector Japp's relentless pursuit of Victor Crane. Instead, he had requested a private audience with the manor's groundskeeper, Mr. Gibbs, whose knowledge of the clock tower might shed light on its peculiar silence. As they awaited Gibbs, Hastings ventured a question. "Poirot, you seem awfully certain that Crane isn't our man, but that letter in his room, it's damning, isn't it? And his temper last night, arguing with Sir Reginald in front of everyone." Poirot raised a hand, his eyes twinkling with that familiar blend of patience and exasperation. "Mon ami, the letter is a distraction, a piece of theatre. It is too neatly placed, too easily found. The true criminal does not leave such obvious breadcrumbs unless they wish to lead us astray. No, Hastings, we must look to the small things, the things that whisper, not shout." Before Hastings could press further, Mr. Gibbs entered, a wiry man in his late 50s with weathered hands and a face creased by years of outdoor labor. His eyes, however, were sharp, and he carried himself with the quiet dignity of one who took pride in his work. Poirot greeted him with a polite nod. Gesturing to a chair, "Monsieur Gibbs," Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. "You are the keeper of the clock tower, oui? Tell me, when did it last chime, and why has it fallen silent?" Gibbs shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "The tower chimed regular as always yesterday, sir, up until about 6 in the evening. Then it stopped. I went up to check the mechanism, thought it might be a gear or a weight, but it was jammed, sir. A piece of metal like a rod was wedged in the works. Took me near an hour to get it out, but it's working again now." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his moustache twitching slightly. A rod, you say? Describe it, if you please. Gibbs frowned, as if recalling the details taxed his memory. It was small, sir. No longer than my forearm, and rusted at one end. Odd thing, though, it didn't belong there. The clock's all brass and iron, polished proper. This looked like it came from somewhere else, like it was put there on purpose. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, who felt a familiar thrill at the glint in his friend's eye. And this rod?
In the tower, sir, by the mechanism. Didn't think it was important, just some bit of rubbish. Rubbish, perhaps, Poirot murmured. But the rubbish with a purpose. Merci, Monsieur Gibbs. You have been most helpful. As Gibbs left, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression one of quiet triumph. You see, Hastings, the clock tower's silence is no accident. It is a clue, a deliberate act. Someone wished to mark the time of the crime, to draw attention to 11:47. But why? And this rod. It is an anomaly, a piece that does not fit. We must examine it. They made their way to the clock tower, a tall stone structure that stood apart from the manor, its spire piercing the grey sky. The interior was a maze of gears and weights, the air heavy with the scent of oil and metal. Poirot climbed the narrow stairs with surprising agility, his eyes scanning every surface. At the heart of the mechanism, he found the rod Gibbs had described, a slender piece of rusted metal, out of place among the gleaming components. Poirot examined it closely, his gloved fingers tracing its contours. Regardez, Hastings, he said, holding the rod aloft. This is no part of the clock. It is too crude, too worn. And see here. He pointed to a faint mark etched into the metal, a series of scratches that formed a crude initial. Ah, this is not rubbish. This is evidence. Hastings leaned closer, his brow furrowed. Ah, for Reginald? But why would he have such a thing? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps it is not Sir Reginald's initial, but another's. Or perhaps it is a message, a signature left by the killer. We must consider all possibilities. They returned to the manor, where the atmosphere had grown even more strained. Inspector Japp, undeterred by Poirot's doubts, had summoned the household to the drawing room for further questioning. As Poirot and Hastings entered, they found the suspects seated in a tense circle. Lady Eleanor, her face a mask of grief. Clara, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Charles Langley, his spectacles fogged with nervous perspiration. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her gaze cool and unreadable. And Victor Crane, his defiance tempered by a growing unease. Japp, pacing before the fireplace, held up the letter found in Crane's room. This, he declared, is proof of motive. Mr. Crane, you stood to lose everything if Sir Reginald backed out of your deal. And now we've found a witness, Miss Clara Harwood, who says she saw you near the library just before midnight. Clara gasped, her eyes wide with shock.
Poirot's eyes gleamed. And at what time, precisely, did you see this figure? Clara hesitated, glancing at her mother. It was just before midnight. I'd gone to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. Merci, mademoiselle. Your observation is most valuable. He turned to Japp. Inspector, I suggest you refrain from conclusions until all evidence is considered. The figure Mademoiselle Clara saw may not be Monsieur Crane. And this letter, it is a distraction, a red herring. The true clue lies elsewhere. As Japp sputtered, Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each suspect. Hastings, watching closely, noted the faintest tremor in Dr. Marsh's hand as she reached for her tea, and the way Langley's eyes darted toward the clock tower. The rod, the silent clock, the figure in the dark.
These were the threads of the mystery, and Poirot was weaving them together with his characteristic precision. As the group dispersed, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the rod is our clue, but it is only the beginning. Someone in this house stopped the clock tower at 11:47, and someone left that rod as a marker. We must discover the connection between the time, the place, and the person. The truth is close, Hastings, but it hides behind a veil of lies." The weight of Poirot's words settled over Hastings as they returned to the library. The mystery was deepening, and while Japp chased shadows, Poirot was zeroing in on the subtle contradiction that would unravel the truth. The silent clock tower loomed in the distance, its silence a challenge that only Hercule Poirot could answer. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The afternoon at Blackthorn Manor unfolded under a sky heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. Inside the grand estate, the tension among the occupants was palpable, as if the very walls absorbed the unease that followed Sir Reginald Harwood's murder. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the gloom, moved through the house with the quiet precision of a chessmaster positioning his pieces. Captain Arthur Hastings, trailing behind, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him, each new revelation only deepening the enigma. Poirot had spent the morning in contemplation, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he reviewed the clues. The broken clock frozen at 11:47, the rusted rod found in the clock tower, and Clara Harwood's uncertain sighting of a figure near the library just before midnight. These fragments, though disparate, were beginning to form a pattern in Poirot's mind, one he was not yet ready to share. Hastings, accustomed to
Someone... It's all so vague.
Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of insight.
Mon ami, the vagueness is precisely what interests me. In a case such as this, where every suspect guards their secrets, it is the inconsistencies, the hesitations, that reveal the truth. The rod, the clock, the figure, they are pieces of a puzzle, and we are close to seeing its shape. But first, we must uncover the lies that hide it. Their destination was the morning room, where the suspects had gathered under Inspector Japp's orders for another round of questioning. The room, with its delicate wallpaper and ornate furniture, felt stifling despite its elegance. Lady Eleanor Harwood sat by the window, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the distant clock tower. Clara, her daughter, fidgeted with a lace handkerchief, her face pale. Charles Langley, the solicitor, scribbled notes in a small book, his nervous energy barely contained. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, ever composed, sipped tea with an air of detachment, while Victor Crane, the American, paced near the fireplace, his frustration evident in every heavy step. Japp, his face flushed with determination, addressed the group. "We've got new information," he announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Miss Clara's sighting of a figure near the library puts a man in the vicinity of the crime at the critical hour. And Mr. Crane, your alibi with the maid, Eliza, doesn't hold up as well as you think. She says she left your room by 11:05, which gives you plenty of time to get to the library by midnight." Crane's face darkened, his fists clenching. "That's nonsense, Inspector. I told you, I was in my room all night. You're fishing, and you're wasting time." Before Japp could retort, Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. "Monsieur Crane, your indignation is noted, but let us consider another matter. Monsieur Langley," he turned to the solicitor, who started at the sound of his name. "You were Sir Reginald's confidant. You handled his financial affairs. Tell me, were there any irregularities in his accounts that might have caused tension?" Langley's spectacles slipped down his nose, and he pushed them up with a trembling hand. "Irregularities? No, nothing of the sort. Sir Reginald's finances were in order, though he was planning a significant investment with Mr. Crane's company. There were disagreements about the terms, but nothing untoward." Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing. Disagreements, you say. And yet I have learned from the butler, Mr. Simmons, that Sir Reginald intended to revise his will. Is this not so? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer, and Clara's eyes widened. Langley's face turned ashen. I was
Shifting to Lady Eleanor. Madame, you were closest to your husband. Did he speak of altering his will? Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, and for a moment Hastings thought she might refuse to answer. He hinted at changes, she said at last, her voice low. He felt Clara should be better provided for, given her youth and her prospects, but he did not share details. Clara flushed, her hands twisting the handkerchief into knots. Father was worried about me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He thought some of his associates, business partners, were not trustworthy. He didn't name names, but he was troubled. Poirot's eyes narrowed, and Hastings could almost hear the gears turning in his friend's mind. Troubled, Poirot repeated softly. And yet he invited these associates to his home. Most interesting. The questioning continued, but Poirot's attention seemed to drift, his gaze lingering on the smallest details. The way Dr. Marsh's fingers brushed against a silver cigarette case in her pocket, the faint tremor in Langley's voice, the way Crane avoided Clara's eyes. As the group dispersed, Poirot drew Hastings aside, leading him to the conservatory, where the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids offered a brief respite from the manor's tension. Hastings, Poirot said, his voice low, the lies are multiplying. Langley conceals something about the will. Lady Eleanor knows more than she admits. And Mademoiselle Clara, she is frightened not just of the murder, but of what she knows. And then there is the rod in the clock tower, marked with an R. It is not Sir Reginald's, I am certain. It belongs to another. Hastings frowned. Another R? But who? There's no one else in the house with that initial. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Is there not? Or perhaps the R is not an initial at all, but a symbol, a clue to something deeper. We must return to the clock tower, Hastings. There is more to learn. They made their way to the stone tower, its silence a stark contrast to the ticking of the manor's many clocks. Inside, Poirot examined the mechanism once more, his gloved hands moving with surgical precision. He paused at the spot where the rod had been found, his eyes tracing the gears. Regardez, he said, pointing to a faint scratch on a brass plate, barely visible. This was made by the rod, but it is not random. It is deliberate, a mark left to ensure the rod was noticed. Hastings leaned closer, his confusion growing. But why go to such trouble? If the killer wanted to stop the clock, why leave a clue at all? Because, mon ami, the killer wishes to play a game. The clock, the rod, the time of 11:47. They are pieces in a puzzle meant to mislead. But Hercule Poirot does not play the games of others. He sets his own. As they descended the tower, a shout from the manor drew their attention. Eliza, the maid, stood pale.
Mr. Poirot, sir. It's Mr. Langley. He's collapsed in the study. Dr. Marsh is with him, but he's in a bad way.
Poirot and Hastings hurried to the study, where Langley lay on a chaise, his face grey, his breathing shallow. Dr. Marsh knelt beside him, her medical bag open. It's his heart, she said briskly. He's had a shock. He needs rest. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied Langley's trembling form. A shock, you say, doctor? Or perhaps a guilty conscience? Langley's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, fear flashed across his face. I didn't mean to, he whispered, then fell silent as Dr. Marsh administered a sedative. As the room cleared, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression grave. The lies are unraveling, Hastings. Langley knows something, perhaps about the will, perhaps about the murder. And someone in this house is desperate to keep those secrets buried. The clock tower loomed outside, its silence a constant reminder of the mystery's heart. Poirot's gaze lingered on it, his mind racing toward the truth as the web of lies grew ever more tangled. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The rain that had threatened all day finally descended upon Blackthorn Manor, its steady patter against the windows lending a mournful rhythm to the oppressive atmosphere within. The grand estate, with its towering gables and shadowed corridors, seemed to close in upon itself, as if guarding the secrets that festered in the wake of Sir Reginald Harwood's murder. Hercule Poirot, his small frame a beacon of calm amid the storm, sat in the conservatory, his sharp eyes fixed on a single orchid, its delicate petals trembling in the draught. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing nearby, felt the weight of the case pressing ever heavier, the tangled web of lies and half-truths tightening around the suspects. The collapse of Charles Langley, the solicitor, had sent a ripple of unease through the household. His whispered words, "I didn't mean to," hung in the air like a confession, yet they were maddeningly vague. Dr. Evelyn Marsh had declared his condition stable, attributing it to a weak heart exacerbated by stress. But Poirot's keen gaze had lingered on her as she worked, noting the deftness of her hands and the cool detachment in her eyes. Hastings, ever the observer of his friend's methods, knew that Poirot was closing in on something vital, though the shape of it remained elusive. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, "Langley's collapse, do you think it was guilt? He seemed terrified, as if he'd been caught out." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his moustache twitching. "Guilt, mon ami, is a powerful force, but it is not always the guilt of the murderer. Monsieur Langley carries a burden, oui."
Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the conservatory door. Clara Harwood stood there, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She clutched her handkerchief, its lace edges frayed from nervous twisting.
"Monsieur Poirot,"
she said, her voice trembling.
"may I speak with you? Alone?"
Poirot glanced at Hastings, who nodded and stepped outside. Though he lingered near the door, his curiosity piqued. Poirot gestured for Clara to sit, his demeanor gentle but probing.
"Mademoiselle, you are distressed. Speak freely, and Hercule Poirot will listen."
Clara hesitated, her gaze darting to the rain-streaked windows.
It's about father,"
she began, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I didn't tell the whole truth earlier. I couldn't, not with mother and the others listening. But I saw something that night, something I can't explain."
Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing.
"Continue, mademoiselle. What did you see?"
Clara took a shuddering breath.
"When I went to the kitchen for water, just before midnight, I saw a man near the library, as I told Inspector Japp, but it wasn't just a shadow. I recognized his coat. It was Mr. Langley's. He was coming from the direction of the clock tower, not the library, and he looked frightened. I didn't say anything because I was afraid of what it might mean. Father trusted Mr. Langley, but they'd argued recently about money, about the estate."
Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was clearly racing.
"And this argument, mademoiselle? What was its nature?"
Clara's hands twisted the handkerchief tighter.
"Father thought someone was stealing from him, small amounts, over time, from the estate accounts. He didn't name Mr. Langley directly, but he said he'd confront the person responsible after the weekend. I think Mr. Langley knew he was suspected."
Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair.
"Merci, Mademoiselle Clara. Your courage in speaking is admirable. But tell me, why come to me now?"
Clara's eyes filled with tears.
"Because I'm scared, Monsieur Poirot. Scared that whoever killed father is still here, watching us. And Mr. Langley's collapse, it felt like a warning. I don't know who to trust anymore."
Poirot rose, his small stature somehow commanding the room.
"Fear not, mademoiselle. Hercule Poirot trusts in the order and method of the mind. The truth, it will reveal itself. Return to your mother and say nothing of this to others."
As Clara left, her steps unsteady, Hastings re-entered, his face alight with curiosity. "What did she say, Poirot? Something about Langley, I'll wager?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic.
"Indeed, Hastings. Mademoiselle Clara has given us a piece of the puzzle, but it is a piece
in the air. We must tread carefully, for the truth is close, but it is guarded by fear." The afternoon wore on, and Poirot requested a private meeting with Dr. Evelyn Marsh. They found her in the drawing room, her medical bag at her side, her expression as composed as ever. Poirot studied her closely, noting the faint lines of tension around her mouth, the way her fingers brushed the silver cigarette case in her pocket. "Doctor," Poirot began, his voice smooth. "You are a woman of science, of precision. Tell me, when you examined Monsieur Langley, did you find anything unusual beyond his heart condition?" Dr. Marsh's eyes met his, steady but guarded. "Nothing unusual, Monsieur Poirot. His collapse was consistent with cardiac stress, likely brought on by the strain of the investigation. I gave him a mild sedative, and he's resting now." Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the cigarette case. "And your own observations, Doctor? You are a guest here, yet you seem detached from the emotions of the house. Have you no theories about the murder?" Dr. Marsh's lips tightened, and for a moment Hastings thought she might evade the question. "I observe, Monsieur Poirot, as you do," she said at last. "But I am a physician, not a detective. My concern is for the living, not the dead. Yet the living may hold the key to the dead," Poirot replied, his tone gentle but probing. "You were in your room at the time of the murder, oui? Can anyone confirm this?" Dr. Marsh's hand stilled on the cigarette case. "No one, I'm afraid. I was reading, alone. But I assure you I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald." Poirot inclined his head, dismissing her with a polite smile. But as she left, he turned to Hastings. "The good doctor, she is too controlled, too careful. She hides something, Hastings, just as Langley does. And the cigarette case, she touches it when she is nervous. Why?" Before Hastings could respond, a commotion from the hall drew their attention. Lady Eleanor stood there, her face pale, a letter clutched in her hand. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice shaking, "I found this in my husband's study, hidden in a book. It's a draft of his new will." Poirot took the letter, his eyes scanning the elegant script. It outlined significant changes: a larger inheritance for Clara, a reduction in Lady Eleanor's share, and a clause cutting off certain business associates, unnamed but implied to include Victor Crane. Most strikingly, it mentioned a betrayal that had prompted the revisions. "This," Poirot said softly, "is the spark that lit the fuse. Someone knew of this will, Hastings, and they acted to prevent its execution. The lies are unraveling, and with them, the hidden will. Each was a thread in the tapestry of deceit." The emotional turning point had arrived, and Poirot was poised to pull the threads apart, revealing the truth beneath. Chapter 9. The Trap. The rain had ceased by late afternoon, leaving Blackthorn Manor cloaked in a damp, oppressive stillness that mirrored the unease within its walls. The grand estate, with its ancient stone and heavy draperies, seemed to pulse with secrets, each room a stage for the drama unfolding around Sir Reginald Harwood's murder. Hercule Poirot, his small frame radiating quiet authority, stood in the drawing-room, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled suspects. Captain Arthur Hastings, at his side, felt a familiar thrill. The moment when Poirot, with his methodical precision, began to tighten the net around the truth. The discovery of the draft will, hidden in Sir Reginald's study, had shifted the dynamics of the investigation. Its contents, favoring Clara, reducing Lady Eleanor's inheritance and hinting at a betrayal, had cast a new light on the motives swirling through the manor. Inspector Japp, still fixated on Victor Crane, had dismissed the will as secondary, but Poirot saw it as the fulcrum of the crime. Now, as evening approached, Poirot had requested the household gather, ostensibly for an update on the investigation. Hastings knew better. This was no mere briefing. Poirot was setting a trap. The drawing-room was a study in contrasts, the opulent chandelier casting soft light over the tense faces of the suspects. Lady Eleanor sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting to the letter now resting on the table before Poirot. Clara, beside her, seemed smaller, her youthful vitality dimmed by fear. Charles Langley, recovered from his collapse but still pale, adjusted his spectacles nervously. Dr. Evelyn Marsh maintained her clinical composure, though her fingers brushed the silver cigarette case in her pocket. Victor Crane, his broad frame filling an armchair, glowered at Japp, who stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs,
We stand at a crossroads in this affair. A man is dead, his life extinguished in this very house, and the truth, it hides behind a veil of deception. But Hercule Poirot does not permit the truth to remain hidden. Tonight, we shall lift that veil. Japp shifted uncomfortably, clearly displeased at Poirot's theatrical tone, but he said nothing. Hastings, watching the suspects, noted their reactions. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, Langley's hands trembled, and Crane's scowl deepened. Only Dr. Marsh remained impassive, her eyes locked on Poirot. "Let us begin with the facts," Poirot continued, pacing slowly. "Sir Reginald Harwood was found dead in the library, a broken clock in his hand. Its hands stopped at 11:47. The clock tower which should have chimed was silent, its mechanism jammed by a rusted rod marked with the letter R.
A figure was seen near the library just before midnight, and a draft will, hidden in a book, suggests a motive rooted in betrayal. These are not coincidences, my friends. They are the threads of a deliberate design." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Monsieur Crane, you have been the focus of Inspector Japp's attention thanks to a letter found in your room. But I say to you, this letter is a red herring, placed to mislead. You did not kill Sir Reginald, though your temper and your business dealings made you an easy target." Crane's eyes widened, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Then who did it, Poirot? Stop dancing around and tell us." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, monsieur. The truth requires method. Let us consider the clock tower. Why was it silenced? Why 11:47? The rod with its R was no accident. It was placed to draw attention to a specific moment. But whose moment and whose R?" He turned to Langley, whose face had grown paler. "Monsieur Langley, you were seen near the clock tower just before midnight by Mademoiselle Clara. You were frightened, oui? And Sir Reginald suspected you of theft from his accounts. Did you fear his new will would expose you?" Langley's spectacles slipped, and he fumbled to catch them. I didn't steal. Yes, we argued, but it was about investments, not theft. I was in the clock tower, yes, but only to check the mechanism. I heard it had stopped and thought it odd." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you did not mention this to the police. Why?" Langley swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. I was afraid. Sir Reginald had threatened to ruin me if I didn't explain certain discrepancies. But I swear I didn't kill him." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Lady Eleanor. "Madam, the draft will suggests your husband felt betrayed. By whom? You knew of his plans to change the inheritance to favor Mademoiselle Clara. Did this cause you pain?" Lady Eleanor's face hardened, though her voice trembled. "Reginald and I had our differences, but I loved him. The will, it was his choice. I would never harm him." Clara, unable to contain herself, burst out, "Mother, tell them! Father said someone was betraying him, not just in business, but personally. He was so angry that night." The room fell silent, the weight of Clara's words hanging heavy. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Marsh, who had remained silent throughout. "Doctor, you are a woman of observation. You were alone at the time of the murder with no alibi. And this cigarette case," he gestured to her pocket, "you touch it when you are nervous. Why?" Dr. Marsh's composure faltered for a fraction of a— "It is not an initial, but a symbol of revenge perhaps, or regret. And the time? 11:47. It is precise, deliberate. Someone wished to mark the moment of the crime to ensure it was noticed. But why?" He paced slowly, his voice dropping to a hypnotic cadence. "Suppose the murderer wished to frame another, say Monsieur Crane. The letter in his room, so conveniently found. Suppose the rod was placed to point to a time, a moment when someone knew Sir Reginald would be vulnerable. And suppose the true motive lies not in money, but in the heart, in a betrayal that cut deeper than business. The suspects shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to one another. Hastings, watching closely, saw the cracks forming. Langley's trembling hands, Lady Eleanor's rigid posture, Clara's tearful gaze, Dr. Marsh's subtle tension. Poirot was applying pressure, and someone was about to break. "Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot said softly, "you saw a man near the clock tower, but you are not certain it was Monsieur Langley. And yet you are certain it was a man. Why?" Clara's voice quavered. "It was the coat. It was heavy, like a man's. But I was so frightened. I didn't look closely." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "And therein lies the trap. The coat, the rod, the time, all are meant to mislead. But Hercule Poirot sees through the deception. The murderer is among us, and they have made a mistake. A small mistake, but fatal." He turns to the group, his voice rising. "Tomorrow I shall gather you again, and the truth will be revealed. Until then, reflect on your secrets, for they will not remain hidden." As the suspects dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "You've got them rattled, old chap. But do you know who did it?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they are working. The trap is set, and the murderer will walk into it. Tomorrow we shall see the truth." Outside, the clock tower stood silent, its secrets poised to unravel. Poirot's trap was in place, and the stage was set for the final act. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The morning dawned grey and cold over Blackthorn Manor, the mist clinging to the grounds like a shroud. The grand estate, with its imposing stone facade and silent clock tower, seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the unravelling of the mystery that had gripped it since Sir Reginald Harwood's murder. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever in his tailored suit, stood in the drawing-room, his small frame radiating an air of quiet triumph. Captain Arthur Hastings at his side, Clara Harwood, her eyes red from sleepless nights, clung to her mother's side. Charles Langley, the solicitor, adjusted his spectacles nervously, his earlier collapse still evident in his drawn features. Dr. Evelyn Marsh maintained her clinical calm, though her fingers rested lightly on the silver cigarette case in her pocket. Victor Crane, the American industrialist, stood near the fireplace, his broad shoulders squared, but his expression wary. Inspector Japp, his confidence shaken by Poirot's relentless probing, hovered near the door, his notebook at the ready. Poirot stepped forward, his voice clear and measured, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached the end of this affair. A man lies dead, his life extinguished in this very house, and the truth, it has been hidden behind a tapestry of lies. But Hercule Poirot, with the aid of his little grey cells, has unravelled the threads. Today I shall reveal the murderer of Sir Reginald Harwood." A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Let us begin with the facts. Sir Reginald was found in the library, a broken clock in his hand. Its hands stopped at 11:47. The clock tower, which should have chimed, was silent, its mechanism jammed by a rusted rod marked with an R. A letter was found in Monsieur Crane's room, suggesting a motive, and a figure was seen near the library just before midnight. These are the clues, and they are not random. They are the work of a clever mind, a mind that sought to deceive. He turned to Victor Crane, whose scowl deepened. "Monsieur Crane, you were the obvious suspect. Your quarrel with Sir Reginald, the letter in your room, they pointed to you. But the letter was too convenient, placed where it would be found. You were framed, monsieur, to draw attention from the true killer." Crane's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained wary. "Then who, Poirot? Get to it."
Poirot's gaze shifted to Charles Langley, who flinched under the scrutiny. Monsieur Langley, you were seen near the clock tower just before midnight, frightened and secretive. Sir Reginald suspected you of theft from his accounts, and the draft will threaten your position. You had motive, but your collapse. It was not guilt, but fear. Fear of what you knew. Langley's voice trembled. I didn't kill him. I swear it. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. I believe you, monsieur. You are not the murderer, but you know more than you have said. We shall return to you.
Eyes with a steady, almost defiant look. Dr. Marsh, Poirot said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, you are a woman of precision, of control. You claim to have been alone at the time of the murder, with no alibi. Your cigarette case, it betrays your nerves, a small gesture that speaks of hidden tension, and the rod in the clock tower, marked with an R. It is not an initial, but a symbol of retribution. Dr. Marsh's hand froze on the cigarette case, her face paling slightly. Retribution? That's absurd, Monsieur Poirot. I had no quarrel with Sir Reginald. Poirot's smile was cold. No quarrel, perhaps, but a secret. Let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Sir Reginald was in the library, alone, at 11:47. The clock tower was silenced, its mechanism jammed by the rod, to mark that precise moment. Why? Because the killer wished to create a false timeline, to suggest the murder occurred at 11:47, when in truth it was later, closer to midnight. The broken clock in Sir Reginald's hand was placed there, a deliberate clue to mislead. He paced slowly, his eyes never leaving Dr. Marsh. The figure seen by Mademoiselle Clara was not a man but a woman wearing a heavy coat to disguise her form, a woman who knew the manor well, who could move silently through its halls, a woman who had access to Sir Reginald's trust and his secrets. Dr. Marsh's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice rising with conviction. Sir Reginald was not killed over money, but over a betrayal of the heart. You, Doctor, were his physician, but also his confidant. You knew of his plans to change his will, to expose a betrayal, and you had a motive, one buried deep in your past. He paused, letting the silence build. The R on the rod. It stands for retribution, but also for Reginald. You loved him once, did you not? Years ago, before he married Lady Eleanor. He promised you a future, then cast you aside. You came to Blackthorn Manor not as a guest, but as a woman seeking justice. You stopped the clock tower to mark the moment you confronted him, and when he refused to acknowledge his betrayal, you struck him down, using a heavy paperweight from the desk. The broken clock was your final touch, a symbol of the time he stole from you. Dr. Marsh's composure shattered, her face contorting with anguish. You can't prove that, she cried, her voice breaking. You have no evidence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oh, but I do, Doctor. The cigarette case. You touched it nervously because it was a gift from Sir Reginald, a token from years past, engraved with his initials. I saw it when you opened it yesterday. A fleeting glimpse, but enough. And the rod. It was taken from the manor's old stables, where you walked the day before the murder, planning your act. The groundskeeper, Mr. Gibbs, confirmed a similar rod was missing. You placed it in the clock tower, knowing it would be found, a subtle boast of your revenge. Dr. Marsh's shoulders slumped, and she sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face. He promised me everything, she whispered. And then he threw me away. I couldn't let him ruin another life, not Clara's, not anyone's. The room was silent, the weight of her confessions settling over the group. Japp, stunned, moved to restrain her, but Poirot raised a hand. She will not run, Inspector. The truth has broken her. As Dr. Marsh was led away, Lady Eleanor and Clara clung to each other, their grief mingling with relief. Langley, his face ashen, muttered apologies, admitting he had suspected Dr. Marsh's past with Sir Reginald, but feared speaking out. Crane, for once silent, shook his head in disbelief. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression sombre. The heart, mon ami. It is the most dangerous of motives. It drives us to acts of passion and of destruction. The clock tower,
now repaired, chimed softly in the distance, its sound a stark contrast to the silence that had marked the crime. The truth was revealed, and Blackthorn Manor could begin to heal, but not without scars. The reflection. The morning following Dr. Evelyn Marsh's confession cast Blackthorn Manor in a subdued light, as if the very stones of the estate exhaled a sigh of relief tempered by sorrow. The mist had lifted, and a pale sun filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the drawing-room where Hercule Poirot sat, his small frame composed in a high-backed chair. His polished shoes gleamed, his moustache was immaculate, and his eyes, though sharp, carried a trace of melancholy. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated across from him, felt the weight of the case's resolution, a complex blend of triumph and tragedy that lingered like the faint scent of rain on the air. The household was quieter now, the frenetic energy of suspicion replaced by a sombre acceptance. Lady Eleanor and Clara Harwood had retreated to their quarters, grappling with the revelation of Dr. Marsh's motive, a love betrayed years ago, twisted into a vengeful act. Charles Langley, still shaken by his own secrets, had busied himself with paperwork, as if routine could restore normalcy. Victor Crane, cleared of suspicion, had announced his intention to leave for London, his brash demeanour softened by the ordeal. Inspector Japp, though grudgingly impressed by Poirot's brilliance, had departed to oversee Dr. Marsh's transfer to the authorities, muttering about paperwork and the press. Poirot, however, remained, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm's aftermath. Hastings, nursing a cup of tea, broke the silence. "Poirot, you were remarkable as always. The way you pieced it all together, the rod, the clock, the cigarette."
Lips curved into a faint smile, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mon ami, the little grey cells, they do not rest until the truth is clear. Langley, he was guilty of fear, of hiding his knowledge of Sir Reginald's suspicions, but his heart was not that of a murderer. Dr. Marsh, however, she was too controlled, too precise, yet her small gestures betrayed her. The cigarette case, it was the key. When I saw the initials R.H. engraved upon it, I knew it was a link to her past with Sir Reginald. From there the pieces fell into place." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. "But the rod in the clock tower, marked with an R. Why go to such lengths? Why not just kill him and be done with it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "The rod, Hastings, was her signature, her cry of retribution. She wished the world to know, even if only subconsciously, that this was no random act. The R was not just for Reginald, but for her own resolve, her revenge. The clock tower, stopped at 11:47, was a misdirection, meant to confuse the timeline of the murder. She killed him closer to midnight, but placed the broken clock in his hand to suggest an earlier time, hoping to cast suspicion elsewhere. It was clever, but not clever enough to escape Hercule Poirot." Hastings leaned back, marvelling at his friend's precision. "And Clara's sighting of the figure, you knew it was a woman in a man's coat?" "Oui," Poirot said, his voice softening. "Mademoiselle Clara saw what the killer wished her to see. A figure in a heavy coat, moving quickly. Dr. Marsh, she's tall for a woman, and in the dark, with a coat borrowed from the manor's cloakroom, she could pass for a man. It was a calculated risk, but one she took to protect her true identity." The room fell silent. The ticking of a nearby clock, ironic given the case's centerpiece, filling the space. Hastings set down his tea, his expression thoughtful. "It's tragic, isn't it? Dr. Marsh was wronged all those years ago, and it festered until it drove her to this. Do you ever feel sorry for them, Poirot? The ones you catch?" Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the clock tower stood, its mechanism now restored, its chimes ringing softly across the grounds. "The heart, Hastings. It is a fragile thing. It loves, it hates, it breaks, and sometimes it destroys. I do not judge Dr. Marsh for her pain, but for her choice to take a life. Justice, it is not vengeance. It is order, method, the restoration of balance. Hercule Poirot serves that balance, not sentence.
This afternoon, as they prepared to leave, Lady Eleanor appeared, her face etched with grief but softened by gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes, "I cannot thank you enough. You've brought us truth, though it is a painful one. Clara and we will find a way to move forward." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression kind but reserved. "Madame, the truth, it is a heavy gift, but it is necessary. Guard your daughter, and may peace return to Blackthorn Manor." Clara, standing behind her mother, offered a shy smile. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I was so afraid, but you made it right." Poirot's eyes twinkled briefly. "Mademoiselle, fear is a shadow, but the truth is the light that dispels it. Be brave, and all will be well." As they stepped outside, the air crisp and the grounds bathed in soft sunlight, Hastings glanced at the clock tower. "It's chiming again," he remarked. "Strange how something so simple could hold the key to it all." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The simplest things, Hastings, they are often the most profound." The clock tower spoke in its silence, and Hercule Poirot listened. They boarded the waiting car, the manor receding behind them as they drove toward the horizon. The case of the silent clock tower was closed, but its echoes lingered in Hastings' mind, a testament to the brilliance of Poirot's method and the enduring complexity of the human heart. As the car rolled on, Poirot gazed out the window, his thoughts already turning to the next mystery, the next challenge for his little grey cells. Chapter 12. A Lingering Shadow. The journey back to London was marked by the rhythmic hum of the car's engine, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had cloaked Blackthorn Manor for days. Hercule Poirot sat beside Captain Arthur Hastings, his posture as impeccable as ever, his eyes fixed on the passing countryside with a contemplative air. The resolution of Sir Reginald Harwood's murder had brought clarity to the tangled web of deceit, yet Hastings sensed an unusual restlessness in his friend, a subtle indication that the case, though solved, had left threads yet to be fully unraveled. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rolling hills, and Hastings, unable to resist the urge to probe, broke the silence. "Poirot, you've done it again, solved the unsolvable. Dr. Marsh's confession tied it all up neatly, didn't it? The rod, the clock, the cigarette case, it's almost too perfect, don't you think?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile, his mustache quivering slightly. "Mon ami, you are learning, are you not? You sense the shadow that lingers, the whisper of something not quite set."
Eyebrow intrigued. A question. "But Dr. Marsh confessed. She admitted to the motive, the act, everything. What's left to question?" Poirot turned to him, his eyes gleaming with that familiar intensity. "The method, Hastings. The method is clear, but the why of certain details, it troubles me. The rod in the clock tower, marked with an R. It was a bold gesture, a signature of retribution. Yet why leave such a clue at all? And Mademoiselle Clara's sighting of the figure, her certainty that it was a man's coat, yet her hesitation. These are not contradictions, but they are inconsistencies. I wish to be certain." Hastings frowned, his honest face reflecting his confusion. "You think there's more to it? Another accomplice, perhaps?" Poirot shook his head. "No, not an accomplice, but a shadow. A piece of the puzzle that fits, yet does not satisfy. We shall return to Blackthorn Manor, Hastings, but discreetly. There is one more conversation to be had." The car turned back toward the manor, the decision made with Poirot's characteristic decisiveness. By the time they arrived, dusk had settled, and the estate loomed like a sentinel in the fading light. The clock tower, now restored to its rhythmic chimes, sounded a single note as they approached, a reminder of the mystery's heart. The butler, Mr. Simmons, greeted them with surprise, but ushered them into the library, where Lady Eleanor and Clara were seated, sorting through papers left by Sir Reginald. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor said, rising, her voice tinged with weariness, "I thought you had left for London. Is something amiss?" Poirot bowed slightly, his demeanour polite but purposeful. "Madame, forgive the intrusion. The case is closed, oui, but there is a small matter, a detail that requires clarification. May I speak with Mademoiselle Clara alone for a moment?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her eyes flickering with concern, but she nodded, leaving the room with a reluctant glance at her daughter. Clara, her youthful face pale, clutched a stack of letters, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've told you everything I know." Poirot's eyes softened, but his gaze was piercing. "Mademoiselle, you are a brave young woman, and your honesty has been invaluable. But there is one moment, your sighting of the figure near the library. You said it was a man's coat, yet you were uncertain. I ask you now, in the quiet of this room, to search your memory. Was there something else, something you did not wish to say?" Clara's eyes widened, and she looked away, her fingers tightening on the letters. I don't know what you mean. It was dark.
Made you doubt? Speak, and let the shadow lift.
Tears welled in Clara's eyes, and she sank into a chair, her resolve crumbling.
"It was the coat," she whispered. "I said it was a man's, but I recognized it. It was Father's coat, the one he kept in the cloakroom. I didn't want to say because I thought it might mean he was still alive when I saw the figure, or that someone was trying to make it look like him. I was so confused, so scared." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "And this coat, it was heavy, dark, oui? The kind that could disguise a woman's form in the shadows." Clara nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, I didn't understand why anyone would wear it. I thought maybe I was mistaken, but it was Father's coat, I'm sure of it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. "Merci, Mademoiselle Clara. You have given me the final piece. The coat, it confirms the deception. Dr. Marsh wore it to mislead, to create the illusion of a man's presence, perhaps even to suggest Sir Reginald himself was moving about. It was a clever touch, but it betrays her." Hastings, standing silently by the door, felt a surge of admiration. "So that's it, Poirot. The coat seals it? No lingering doubts?" Poirot turned to him, his smile enigmatic. "The coat, Hastings. It is the final brushstroke on the canvas. Dr. Marsh's plan was meticulous, but she could not account for the keen eyes of a frightened girl. The shadow is lifted, and the truth is complete." As they prepared to leave, Lady Eleanor returned, her face etched with concern. "Is it truly over, Monsieur Poirot? Can we find peace now?" Poirot bowed deeply. "Madame, the truth is a balm, though it stings. Your husband's killer is in custody, and the secrets of Blackthorn Manor are laid bare. Heal, and let the manor live again." They stepped into the evening air, the clock tower chiming softly behind them. Hastings glanced at Poirot, whose expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "You couldn't leave it alone, could you?" he said with a smile. "Had to tie up every loose end." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon ami, the little grey cells, they demand order. A mystery is not solved until every thread is woven into place. Now to London, and perhaps a cup of tisane to soothe the mind." As the car pulled away, the manor faded into the dusk, its secrets finally at rest. The clock tower's chimes echoed faintly, a reminder that even in silence the truth had spoken, and Hercule Poirot had listened.